here. We'll get started. Our guest today is Andrew Dabeka, and he's an athlete who plays badminton, and he coaches badminton now too. And he's actually gone to the Olympics for badminton, so he's going to tell us a bit more about his sport and his experience today. So on that note, Andrew, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay. Hi, everyone. So before I talk about myself a little bit more, I'm going to talk about my sport, the sport that I fell in love with when I was just 13 years old. And I'm going to introduce to you the most important thing in our sport, which is called a badminton shuttle. Some of you guys have heard of it called a birdie, but we call it a shuttle. And this thing is a very speedy, powerful projectile. And to give you an idea of how fast this thing can travel, we're going to give you a comparison again between tennis and badminton. Does anyone know what the fastest tennis serve ever hit was? Put up your hand if you do. I don't see too many hands going up. So I'm going to tell you it was 260 kilometers an hour, which is really fast. If you think about a car driving on the highway, maybe it goes 120 kilometers an hour. So the tennis serve is sort of double that. And a badminton shuttle can be hit almost double that. I think the world record is around 410 kilometers an hour that this thing is traveling through the air. So the badminton shuttle is made out of feathers. I'm sure a lot of you guys have played with birdies or shuttles that are made out of plastic. At the top level, the professionals, we use something like this, and it's made with 16 goose feathers, all from the left wing of a goose. So many of you are probably worried about our Canadian geese population. We don't use Canada geese, so not to worry about that. And to hit this thing as hard as we do, we use one of these, a badminton racket, and I know all of you have seen one of these before, probably not with no strings. I haven't had this one restrung. The professional players, they often break their strings, and so they have to get them replaced quite often. So that's enough about badminton, the sport itself. Well, I'll tell you a bit more. We have sort of a circuit, which is like tennis. There's tournaments all around the world that are happening basically 12 months of the year. And right now there's a big tournament going on in Brazil, in Rio de Janeiro, and we have one player from my club who's there competing right now. And just like tennis, there's a lot of badminton players who play professionally. I was one of them. I retired recently from competitive play, and now I work as a coach. But basically, the life of a badminton player means traveling about 20 weekends of the year to different countries all around the world, in Europe, in Asia, South America, North America, Oceania, that's Australia, New Zealand, that area. And that was my life for about 15 years. I started playing when I was 13, as I mentioned earlier, and I really loved the sport, and my coach was also an Olympian at that time, and so I had really a big role model to look up to in him, and I took it really seriously, and I trained very hard. Basically every day after school, I went to my club and I practiced, and so I quickly improved and became one of the better players in Canada, and eventually I became the best player in Canada, and I started representing Canada at World Championships, at Pan American Games. Recently, put up your hands if you have watched any of the Commonwealth Games that happened the last 2 weeks. Yeah, some of you. So that was another big event for badminton. And actually, a badminton player won the gold medal there, which was the first time in history that Canada's ever won a gold at the Commonwealth Games. So that was pretty amazing. And yeah, so basically that's sort of the life of a badminton player. We travel around playing tournaments, trying to get better, trying to achieve our goals. And I have to say it was quite a glamorous lifestyle. I got to see much of the world, and for those of you who like traveling, it's definitely a good job to have. So yeah, I guess my big highlight was, as Anne mentioned, I went to the Olympics, and that was back in 2008 at the Olympics, Summer Olympic Games that happened in Beijing. And for me, that was definitely a big goal of mine and that I had strived for all my career, and I finally achieved it to qualify. And unfortunately, I didn't come home with a medal, but I was able to represent Canada at the biggest tournament that we have. So that was pretty exciting for me. Um,
Yeah, awesome. That's awesome. Thank you for telling us a bit more about badminton and your experience. Let's go to questions now. Does anyone have a question for Andrew in London? I thought we'll go to Ancaster next. Hi.
Why did they create Olympics?
that's a very, very, very good question. Well, I don't know the full history of why they created the Olympics, but what the Olympics means to me is that it's a chance for countries to come together in a sporting environment where athletes can test themselves against other athletes, the best athletes from other countries from around the world. And so for me, it's a very peaceful, friendly type thing where we come together and I meet all these other badminton players from other countries and we challenge each other. I'm sure you guys play sports and do games and challenge your friends at different games. Earlier, people talked about Wii tennis, and the Olympics is just a way that people can challenge themselves against others and make friends, and we can sort of become united as one world.
Yeah, I agree. It is the Olympics are a good way to bring the world together. That's a good way to think about it. So let's go to the camper that had his hand up in Ancaster. What is your question for Andrew?
What does it feel like to be an Olympic athlete?
Um, just imagine that you really like something and it's not easy to get that thing, and you work really, really hard for years and years and years towards getting that goal or objective, and then one day you finally reach it. And that's what the feeling of being an Olympian is like. On top of that, you get to be a representative of your country, get to represent your family, your friends. You know, you're on TV and you can sort of wave at everyone and say, hey, I made it, I achieved that goal. And so that was for me a really nice part of qualifying for the Olympics, and that's sort of how it felt.
Nice. Okay, let's go to Woodstock for the next question. Hi.
Is there, if there's a difference from badminton and tennis, is there a difference from badminton and tennis rackets?
Yes, very much so. So you've all probably put up your hand, everyone, if you've held a tennis ball. Okay, good. And now uh, think about a tennis ball being light as air and not weighing anything. And that's basically the difference between a badminton shuttle and a tennis ball. A tennis ball is quite heavy compared to a badminton shuttle. And so the tennis racket is much, much heavier because if you try to hit a tennis ball with a badminton racket, you're probably going to break the badminton racket. I don't know if all of you can see this, but I'm bending this badminton racket. It's made out of graphite that's fused together into long strings along the shaft, and basically it's very flexible, but it's very light and fragile. So if you try to hit a tennis ball with one of these things, it will break. So tennis rackets are much heavier, yeah.
Okay. So let's go back to London now for our second round of questions. Hi.
Who was the first person to win a medal?
Um, in which sport? Do you mean at the Olympic Games? Oh, you mean at the Commonwealth Games recently, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So her name is Michelle Lee. She's from Toronto. Um, she was, like I said, the first one to ever win a medal at the gold medal at the Commonwealth Games, and she plays singles. She's 23 years old, and she's one of Canada's best ever badminton players. So we are very proud of her.
Yeah, that's awesome. So let's go to Ancaster. I see a camper already coming up there.
How do you play badminton?
How do you play? Well, you have to swing this racket many times and very fast, and you try to get this shuttle to hit the floor. And so that hard shot that we call in badminton is called a smash. And that's a shot that we use a lot. That's when you hit the shuttle from over your head and you try to hit the shuttle downwards so it hits the floor. And so the goal is basically we play with a net, and you basically have to hit the shuttle over the net until it touches the floor or the opponent can't return it. And that's how we play.
Sounds like fun. And it's a pretty fast-moving game, isn't it, right?
Yeah, it's the fastest racket sport. As I mentioned before, it's much, much faster than tennis in terms of the speed of the shuttle. And it's a smaller court than tennis, so there's a lot of bouncing back and forth of this shuttle over the net many, many times.
Yeah, lots
Yep.
of cardio.
Yeah, it's a tough sport.
Yeah. All right. So let's go to a question in Woodstock now.
Okay.
I see a hand up in the back there. Just come a little closer to the mic to ask your question, please. Just so we can hear you better.
Wait a second.
You go for it, buddy.
How many medals have you won in the different tournaments?
Yeah.
Oh, that's a very good question. A lot. I actually have never counted, but I've probably won, at least 40 or 50 tournaments in my life, both internationally and across Canada and across Ontario. So starting up from a young age, I played local tournaments in Ottawa, and then I won those, and then I won the tournaments in Ontario, provincial tournaments, and then I won national tournaments, and then I started to play internationally. And over the years, I was able to get a few international titles. My biggest title was probably winning the US Open. It's sort of similar to the tennis US Open, which is coming up in a few weeks. I beat a player from Denmark in the final of that tournament. I forgot to mention actually earlier the countries where badminton is really big. In Europe, the biggest country for badminton is Denmark. Are there any Danes in the group from Southern Ontario? Anyone with Danish heritage? Swedish heritage? Yeah? Okay, very cool. In Asia, in China, badminton is more or less the national sport. So there's a lot of people that play in China. Indonesia, it's the national sport. And so in other parts of the world, sort of like hockey is in Canada, badminton is really one of the biggest sports in a lot of different countries.
Cool. So we have time. Let's go back to London for another round of questions. Hi.
How many tournaments have you been in?
That's a very good question. I have to say I've never counted, but it's in the hundreds. I've probably played about 400 or 500 tournaments in my whole badminton life. Just to give you an example, the Olympic year, so the year before leading up to the Olympic Games in Beijing in 2008, I played 23 tournaments in 1 year. So 52 weeks in the year, basically almost half the year I was on the road somewhere in Asia or Europe or South America or North America playing in tournaments. So it was really a lot of tournaments over the course of my career.
Oh, very cool. Do you still go to tournaments as a coach? Like, are you still traveling around
That's
that
a good
much,
question,
or?
Anya. So I do travel probably to only about 6 or 7 tournaments a year now with my players. I'm based out of Ottawa. Has anyone been to Ottawa or have family in Ottawa? Put up your hands. All right, so many people. Great. Yeah, so I'm based out of Ottawa, and at my club I have a lot of competitive players that I coach now. And so I travel to 1 or 2 international tournaments during the year and 3 or 4 national tournaments and 3 or 4 provincial tournaments normally. So it's a busy job for me now.
Yeah, that's awesome. Let's go to Ancaster. Does someone have a question in Ancaster?
If you had to compare badminton to a sport other than tennis, which sport would you compare it to?
Well, probably the easiest ones to compare it to are other racket sports. So we've got squash, we've got racquetball, and you've got table tennis, also known by some people as ping pong. So it's probably closest in a way to squash. Squash uses a ball that's much, much smaller than tennis. And so the racket is about the same length as a badminton racket, maybe a little bit thicker, but because the ball is lighter, it doesn't have to be quite as heavy as a tennis racket. So I think squash and badminton are probably the 2 racket sports that really resemble each other the most.
Oh, okay. Do we have another question in Woodstock?
Yep.
Why do you use goose feathers for your shuttles?
That's a very good idea. And I wish I knew the actual real answer for that. I mean, afterwards, you guys might be able to speculate about that. But the feathers that they use for these birds, these goose feathers from the left wing of the goose feather, of the goose, is they're very symmetrical. And so basically, if these goose feathers were all sort of different, or if these feathers were all different, and you used feathers from, let's say, a goose one day, and then from a pigeon the next day, and from some other bird the other day, they would all fly kind of differently. Some of them are longer, some of them are shorter. So I think at some point, somebody just decided that we have a lot of geese. I think most of these are manufactured in Asia, and there's a lot of geese being raised for food. And I think they thought it was just easy for them to use those leftover feathers to create one of these things. And I think that's probably why they used goose feathers, just because it was the bird that they had the most of.
Yeah, using feathers from the left wing specifically is peculiar, but I guess it makes sense if you're trying to keep everything consistent.
So the reason is that when this bird shuttle travels, it turns in one direction. And if you were to use feathers from the right wing of the goose, it would actually be the opposite, and it would turn in the opposite direction. And so they basically had to choose left wing or right wing. It probably wouldn't matter, but at some point somebody just said, let's take the left wing. And so the shuttle turns in one direction because these left-winged feathers are angled in that way. So a little bit of physics there. But yeah, if you used feathers from the right wing, the shuttle would travel in the opposite direction, and it would sort of kind of mess people up because it's changing all the time from one shuttle to the next.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Did I see one hand up in Woodstock? We're coming to the end of our time, but if someone else has a question there, I thought I saw. Maybe not. No?
I
Okay.
think we're good on questions here.
You do?
Never mind. We've got one. Come on up.
Okay.
How much years have you been playing badminton?
How many years?
Yeah, so we're coming to talk about my age, huh? So I started when I was 13 and I'm 35 years old right now. So I've basically been involved with badminton for 22 years and I officially retired back in 2009. So yeah, so it was a long haul. I played a lot of years and now I'm lucky enough to coach. Um, yeah, so that's the most important thing is that I'm able to stay involved in sports and keep up with it and help sort of the next generation, like all of you, to get better at whatever they're doing.
Awesome. Well, that's all the time we have with Andrew today, but thank you very much, Andrew, for calling into STEM Camp again and telling us a bit more about badminton, some fun facts, and about your experience as an Olympic athlete. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome. Everyone, take care. It was great
And thanks,
talking with all of
everyone.
you. Thank you for the questions. Bye.